Welcome back, Richard. It is Sunday, 5 days post-election.
Exactly.
And we have some answers now. We have some, a victor has been named, and after a lot of work and a lot of time, probably I'm thinking that this was the longest it took to name the winner in history, just about, right?
Exactly. There was an election in 2000. We had the whole Florida fiasco with Bush and Gore, but that was just a single state.
Right.
Okay, and that was the difference. This year, again, we don't like to bring it up every week, but the pandemic influenced the election, as it has influenced everything else, and so there were many mail-in ballots and some unusual things. Not that they were done for the first time. We've always done mail-in ballots. We've always had those things. It's just that this year we had many more because more people decided to use it. So it just took longer.
Well, we had the highest voter turnout ever, right?
And we had a record turnout.
What was amazing to me was that there were more early voters in Texas than there were all voters in Texas 4 years ago.
In 2016, right.
Yeah. More people voted by mail than voted at all in 2016.
Exactly. So we had a record turnout under these very unusual circumstances. And so the tension kept building each day, and people were, we kept watching the election countdown and all that. And so finally by Saturday, I guess, a victor had been named. And, it's interesting. He's still a projected winner. And the networks project a winner because it's not going to be certified for a couple of weeks yet. But
as it always is.
Right. And that's how it is each year, each cycle. So a victory speech has been made last night during the college football game, which angered some people, right? I mean, gotta find something to be angry about. So why not that? So a victory speech has been made, but a concession speech has not been made. Correct. So there's still some turmoil, some questions to be answered. But yes, it's been quite a week. We've seen angry protests.
Yes.
And we saw a celebration yesterday. People are celebrating in some cities. And we still have lots of questions, lots of accusations. And in a very real sense for us in Florida, it feels a little bit like we're in the eye of a hurricane. We've had this week, and now things are calm, but yet it has that feeling that something else is coming, that the other half is coming. On a good note, it's not as bad as we had feared. Many people were projecting gunfights and street violence and all that. That hasn't happened. But we know this other is coming. Right. But like it or not, this is the system we have in our country. This is how it works. It's worked this way for a very long time. And like it or not, only one person can hold this office, and there has to be a winner announced. I hate to use the term winner because it sounds like there was some athletic competition or something.
Right.
But we've been doing this for 237 years. We've done it during wars. We've elected presidents during world wars. We've elected presidents during depressions and economic downturns. And we had another pandemic, 100 years ago that we elected. We did all this. And one of the great accomplishments of our system is what we call the peaceful transition of power.
Right.
And I've always been impressed by that because you see other countries, many other countries do this, but one of the great experiments in our form of government is the peaceful transition of power. And that was a precedent set by George Washington.
Right.
He said, no, 2 terms is enough. 8 years is enough. So I'm going to turn this over to somebody else. And that was the first great accomplishment, I think, is that we turned power over peacefully to somebody else. Right. So, and you can imagine this, the key. I just like to carry the keys to the White House around with you. Honey, do you have the keys? Yeah. So you turn over the keys, but more than that, you turn over the keys to the nuclear codes.
Right.
That box, that
Yeah.
satchel that they carry around, and you hand that over to somebody else. You don't fight over it, you just hand it over.
Right.
Commander-in-chief, here's the commander-in-chief of the largest military. I hadn't thought about that, but wouldn't that give you a nice ego boost, Bernie? If you're like, this is mine, I can do whatever I want with it, right?
Right.
And so you just turn that over, say, here, now it's yours.
Mhm.
And the other thing is the person who won, or the person who didn't win, doesn't have to worry about going to jail,
Right.
being thrown out of the country, being assassinated. Now that you've lost, now we can turn on you. So putting people in jail, that doesn't happen in this country. And immediately the incoming leader is accorded the dignity of the office. The office of the presidency,
Right.
the office of the president has enormous, not just power, it has dignity and respect, that no matter who's in the chair,
Right.
the office has that. Okay, so this person who comes in is granted that dignity. And it shouldn't be any different this time. We hear a lot of talk that it is different and things are going to be all that, but it shouldn't be different this time, but that's up to us. And there's a lot of talk now about they rigged the election. They stole the election. They cheated. But there is no they.
Right. Yeah. And I really like that about Biden's speech yesterday, because he kept reinforcing how, he's going to be the president of the people who elected him, as well as those who voted for Trump. And I think that's really important, because well, it's not necessarily something that we've heard for the last 4 years.
Right.
The last 4 years has been very divisive. It's been very us and them.
Right.
And it sounds like one of the missions Joe Biden is going to try to take on is to reunite. And that's, certainly that's going to be difficult, because there's been so much divisiveness over the last 4 years.
Right.
But that's what that office is supposed to do.
Right.
It's supposed to bring everyone together, so that we have a common mission, a common goal. Even if we disagree on how to get there, that's what politics is supposed to be about, right? Is we may disagree on how to get there, but our goals are very similar.
Right. Yeah. And those two things go together. That there is no they. He's the president of everybody. If you bring this down to local politics, if you're elected mayor of a city, you're mayor of everybody who lives there. I mean, you represent everybody who lives there. Right. If you're a governor, you represent everybody in the state, not just the people who voted for you. You're president of the entire country.
Right.
You're not just president of the people, or mayor, or congressman. We elected a new congressman in our district this year. He is the representative for all of us. He has to represent everybody, not just the people who voted for him. So we have to move away from this idea of they. There is no they. Regardless of who wins, and we now have to take responsibility for ourselves. That's what we want to talk about in today's podcast. Exactly. Is that now we have to take responsibility for ourselves and our actions. We have an obligation. What's been handed to us for 237 years is the peaceful transition of power. Every generation, every cycle, we've done that. We had trouble during the Nixon years, but there was peaceful transition. Lyndon Johnson was absolutely hated, but it was a peaceful transition. And so generations before us have succeeded, regardless of their differences, they've succeeded in maintaining this peaceful transition of power. Now we have that same obligation. We must continue to have a peaceful, it's our obligation. So it's not us and them. All of us now are responsible for ourselves and for our actions to make sure that this thing continues. Okay, this wonderful, peaceful transition.
And this is especially important because, it of course just so happens that the election is right at the beginning of the holiday season. And so we're going to see a lot of family. And just before we started recording, Richard and I, we were talking about how we may not agree necessarily with everyone in our own families.
Exactly.
And so we're going to now enter a season where we're going to be with those family members a lot. And there's going to be a lot of frustration and a lot of potential discord. And so it's important that we talk about how to communicate with each other. There's three articles that we're going to kind of pull from today. All three are in the show notes, but this first article is all about how you talk to people who may be angry about the outcome, the outcomes of the election. And I think that's really important, because this year, maybe more than ever,
right,
there's going to be a lot of heat when it comes to this.
Exactly. I have we hear people saying already that he's not going to give up. He's going to keep fighting. We're going to have lawsuits. And this for many people, this election has not yet been settled.
Right.
And so we are entering a holiday season, and I don't know when it will be settled. I don't know whether, it's not settled until there's a concession speech, until the person who didn't win the election will say, okay, here, now we're going to have this transition. Now I concede and you're the winner. That hasn't happened yet. And so in a very real sense, we're in this eye of the hurricane. Right. And it feels like something else is going to happen.
Yeah. And it's important to know that, I think President Trump has talked about how, I think he's even described himself as not a very good loser. He doesn't like to lose. And nobody does. But it is important to accept what has happened. And, there is the hopes that he will do that. It doesn't change just because he doesn't concede doesn't mean that it changes the outcome. It doesn't mean that it changes what happens in, the middle of January. But, it does change the way that many people will feel and react and behave as a result.
That's right.
Yeah.
And are we going to continue fighting with each other?
Right.
Or are we going to come together as a country and say, okay, we have problems. My goodness, we have a deadly pandemic. We have an infection sweeping. I mean, there are issues that we have to come to terms with. So this first article is about how to talk politics.
Right.
We're not really talking about politics. We're talking about one election.
Okay? Right.
So how do you talk about with angry loved ones who disagree with you?
Right. There's 8 great suggestions. I think that she provides a lot of great suggestions for how to deal with that.
That's right. Right. And as you enter these next couple of weeks, because there's certainly the anguish continues, and in a couple of weeks, what is today? Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to be trying to, some of us might congregate with others. We probably shouldn't because of the pandemic, but but somehow we're going to be with each other. So the first question is, why am I having this conversation?
Right.
But am I having this conversation to goad somebody, to tease, to antagonize somebody? Am I trying to finally say, to try to change their minds? Am I trying to convince you that you were wrong and that I'm right?
Or am I venting? Am I am I dumping? Am I just trying to process through some frustration?
Right.
And so I'm taking it out on whoever it is that may disagree with me, because I'm so frustrated and angry.
Right.
The second one is conversation. That's like that's the most important thing to think of before you even say the first word.
Right. That's right. Why am I doing this? If it's for any other reason than to understand, we're probably headed down a very difficult road that's not going to end well.
Right. Yeah. And that's the second point she makes, right?
Right. Yeah. Try curiosity. I'm just curious, and not in an antagonistic or challenging way, but please help me understand way.
Right.
Help me. What experience did you have that led you to this decision? Okay?
Right.
Not talk about facts and all that silly, these are my facts, these are your facts. Those conversations have to stop. Real curiosity, genuine intellectual curiosity. Third, be prepared to listen.
Yeah.
I think I would have put this first, listening. If you want to talk and express your opinions, you're probably going to be met with some resistance. If you're willing to listen, I think that will encourage real conversation, a real dialogue. Okay?
Right.
So be prepared to listen. and try to understand the other person's position. Use I statements. I don't understand why this happened. When this happens, I feel this way. Those are all I statements. So use I statements so people will open up and talk to you.
Right. Yeah. If you want to talk about it, if you want somebody to hear your views and your opinions, then you have to be willing to hear their views and their opinions
without disagreeing.
Right.
How many times do we say, well, you're wrong about that? Or, well, I have other, well, I know this and I know that. Those kinds of arguments, and that's what they are, aren't going to, they're going to end badly. Okay? Those can't go anywhere good. So be prepared to listen, be prepared to understand. Remember, you're talking to somebody you care about.
Right.
I mean, some of the people in my family, I just absolutely love. I've loved them for my entire life. We grew up together. And I don't like them or love them any less now than I did before. And yet this issue could divide us as few things could. I mean, I don't think of anything else that has had this ability to separate us after, 50 or 60 years, that you could actually stop talking to each other. You could be that angry. We did have a civil war 100 years ago. We do fight about these things. Number 4 is, before you begin any conversation, be prepared for your emotions to get out of hand. You have to prepare for an emotional flare-up. You're talking about a very, very sensitive topic, and nobody wants to concede. Nobody wants to give in, and the likelihood of you getting angry about something is very, very high in these conversations. So mentally prepare yourself for an emotional flare-up. It's probably going to happen.
And also prepare for the reality that they may have an emotional flare-up.
That's right.
And so that you don't react in a defensive way to you can remain calm, and if they have an emotional reaction, you say, you know what, this may not be something we should talk about.
Right. And don't say, we agree to disagree. Please don't use that line. That's like, I don't know where to put that in our panoply, but don't say that, because if I'm in the room, we will have an emotional flare-up. I never understood that. Well, we agree to disagree.
Yeah.
You probably don't disagree as much as you think you do. First of all, okay. So look for some common ground. Stop saying, oh, well, we disagree, so we have to stay in our little bunkers. We have to stay on our sides of the demilitarized zone. No, find some common ground. Okay. Ground yourself. I always like this ground yourself thing. What that means is, don't let your brain unravel too much. Keep yourself, remember where you are, remember who you're talking to, remember, start thinking about other things so that you keep yourself calm. Because when you get agitated, even if when somebody disagrees with you, you're headed toward fight or flight. I mean, that's just what the brain does. It senses danger. It senses some kind of adversarial relationship. And your brain doesn't say, well, this is his brother-in-law, not a saber-toothed tiger. But the brain just reacts. And so if you keep yourself grounded and say, okay, we're at, in their home, and, keep yourself together. Don't let fight or flight unravel in the midst of all this.
Right. And also remember who else is around. Sometimes we talk about things and we don't realize that there are, kids listening, or that there are, people who, other people who may have other experiences, maybe listening, and we start to be very inconsiderate and demeaning and accusatory, and, it may have collateral damage outside of the conversation that you're having with the person that you're directly talking to.
Right. Yeah, it may be very important for you to get your message across, but remember, there are other people around, and you might be offending them. I mean, it might be really troublesome for them. And so we don't have the right to impose ourselves on the rest of the family. No matter how important you think your views are, you don't have a right to do that. Right. So don't start going down those paths.
Right.
Okay? And of course, be aware of us versus them.
Right.
What we call tribal urges. That this is my group and this is your group. So try not to get into that mode of us versus them. we've already talked about number 7, try to find some common ground.
Right. Right.
And I suspect that I was talking to somebody recently, and we voted differently. I'll just say that. And yet we agree on most issues. As we talked about certain things, we agree about immigration. We agree about the economy. We agree about the minimum wage. So as we talked, we found that there were many more points where we agreed than disagreed. Okay,
Right.
so try to find the places where you do agree, and you might disagree about a policy, a part of the policy. I don't think anybody in the country says we don't have an immigration problem. We don't have a pandemic problem. I mean, we all agree. The only place we disagree is how do we want to resolve it, and so let's find the common ground and work there. Okay. And Berney, I didn't know this. You can actually join a group.
Yeah.
Did you know?
No, I didn't know about that either. But that's a great idea.
I guess over the last 4 years, I'm thinking the last 4, maybe the last. I don't know when these things started. Maybe the last 12 years. There are groups where you can actually come together to learn how to discuss these things without being offensive or getting angry.
Yeah. The one the Better Arguments Project.
Yeah. Who would have thought?
I
got to look these things up and see who started it. How does it work? Because I had no idea that there were actually services like this that are available.
But it's great that there are, because you know what, some people want to be able to have these discussions, but just don't know how.
Right.
Those emotions and everything just become so overwhelming, and they just don't know how to have those conversations. And so it's great that there's opportunity to learn how to.
Right. And Berney, you and I taught a course in listening. Okay. But I forget that most people haven't. Most people don't know how to listen. And that's why we taught the course. It was to teach students who were probably going to be counselors how to listen carefully. Okay. We have the luxury of teaching that course, using that book, and but most people don't know how to listen. We're taught how to talk. We're not taught how to listen. Right. So it's not something. Listening is not something we do well.
Right.
So there are places where you can learn how to do that. So that was encouraging. So if you're going to get together, and we're going to be with people who disagree with us, and the disagreements are going to continue, even if it's in a grocery store or at a family dinner, or it might be within your own family. Right. There could be disagreements between what parents think and what their children think. So go ahead and take a look at these, practice these 8 things, and learn how to listen. Listen carefully, listen intentionally, and listen with your heart and listen with your ears. So
yeah, absolutely. Now, and the second article kind of turns what the first article is all about, interacting with someone else, and the second article is a little bit more self-reflective. Thinking about how you're processing the results of the election. And I like that they say no matter who wins, either way, some of these are things that we have to think about, whether it was Biden who won or whether it was Trump who won. These are things that we needed to think about. And I love that the main question is, who am I going to be? Who am I going to be?
As this election started, didn't you spend some time thinking, how am I going to act if Biden is elected? And how am I going to act if Trump is elected? Right. Didn't you go through that yourself?
Absolutely. And we even had discussions, between the two of us and, with others in the office and everything, is, what is it going to mean for who we are as an office, as professionals, as individuals, as family members? What is it going to mean for us, when this person wins or if this person wins?
Right. Exactly. And it comes down to, who am I going to be? I have responsibility. I have responsibility for how I think and but mostly how I act. Okay. Right. And he's not saying, don't worry about it, he's saying be passionate. But he said the problem that we're going to get into is that we are going to allow this election to eclipse everything else about us, okay? And I think that to me is the key to this second article, is that as important as this election is, and it was obviously important because we had record turnout,
right?
Okay, and we have very, very, very strong feelings. And you have to think about, you have a life.
Right.
There's a person here beyond this election,
Right.
and you can't let this election eclipse all the other things that you do. You know, I think about, you still have to stay on your food plan. You still have to exercise. You still have to, do your job. And so there are all these other issues that you should be thinking about. There's a life beyond the election. So you can't let this eclipse everything else.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were saying that it was an interesting perspective. I've never heard anyone say it. And well, you have heard people say it, but it's, so very direct. It was, it doesn't, whoever wins between Trump and Biden, that's not really going to affect me directly.
No.
There are the ripples because of policies and things like that eventually roll out over the course of the 4 years. But from they're more concerned about senators and representatives and more local things, because that is what's going to directly affect.
Right.
And exactly, we get into these camps and we put so much emphasis on this top of the bill, right? The top of the ballot vote, but that doesn't define everything.
Right.
Whether Trump won or Biden won doesn't change whether you go to the movies this weekend, or it doesn't change what you're going to do at work on Monday.
Exactly. Right.
So we have to kind of separate that at least a little bit, so that we can function in a healthy way.
That's right. You have to keep in mind that regardless of what happens, I still have to go to work on Monday morning, hopefully. Okay. I have to do some routine on Monday morning. I have to see people. I have to do a job. I have to go shopping. And so remember that you still are going to be living the same life regardless of who's elected.
Right.
And you have a responsibility. As we said in the introduction, we have a responsibility to maintain the peaceful transition of power.
Right.
But that comes from within, and it comes from each of us. And that's what this article is about.
Exactly.
So the first question.
What I think the other piece to it is that we have to be mindful that whichever side we're on,
right,
we know what it's like for our candidate to lose. Because if you were an Obama supporter,
right,
you probably weren't much of a Trump supporter. And so 4 years ago, you knew what it was like to lose in that election. And if you were a devout Trump supporter, you lost here, but you may have experienced that loss also, 12 years ago when Obama first became president.
Right.
So we get these, we all know what that's like. And just because our candidate lost or our candidate won, it doesn't end everything. We're still moving forward. We're still going on.
Right. And you're right that, people tend to do, the story of Chicken Little, the sky is falling. Okay. So every election we have the sky is falling mentality. And yet, regardless of who's president, and you can go back as far as you want. You go back to Reagan, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You remember, right?
I first remember Reagan. Okay,
so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There have been 6 presidents. Has your life changed very much over those 6 presidents?
Not from what I can tell, no.
Not appreciably, right? I mean, you still pay about the same income tax.
Well, with Reagan, I was in elementary school, so.
Right, but I mean,
but yeah.
It didn't change, right? And you went to a university, you went to a public school, you played sports, you got married, you had kids. Did your life change during any of those administrations?
No.
Did your income tax rate change?
I don't think so.
No. Did your income double?
Right.
Did it decrease by a third, a half? If you owned a gun, do you still have it?
Yeah.
Okay, so our lives don't really change appreciably,
Right.
regardless of who's in the office. You might be angry about some policies, but they probably don't affect you directly.
Right.
Okay. The only place where the president has enormous power that we can is foreign affairs.
Right.
You know, they can start a war that you might not agree with. Okay, and that may directly affect you. But other than that, our lives are not. And I would predict that our lives aren't going to change much, regardless of who wins, of who eventually ends up in the White House in February or at the end of January. Okay, so 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 you know, we have to keep ourselves contained. You and I have said many times, you don't let your emotions control you. You know, you have to, and that's kind of what this article is about, is that it's our responsibility to keep our emotions contained. Each of us has that responsibility. Okay.
Right.
So the first question is, who will I be today?
Right.
What kind of a person, who are you? What kind of a person are you going to be?
Right.
Regardless of what the outcome is.
Right. And hopefully you'll be the same person you were before. Because everyone else will be the same people they were before.
Right. That's right. I don't think I'm going to change.
Yeah.
Right. You know, even if the person I didn't want to won the election, it's not going to change my value system. It's not going to change who I am. Okay.
Right.
So, you know, you decide what your values are, and that's what will drive your thoughts and actions.
Right.
How are you going to find peace of mind?
Yeah.
Win or lose, how do you find peace of mind? How do you not celebrate too much? I don't want to have a victory dance in front of people who felt that they lost something this time. I don't want to do that to anybody. I wouldn't want anybody to do it to me. Okay.
Right.
So where do I get my peace of mind? How do I resolve? How do I settle myself regardless of the outcome, especially if it's not the outcome I wanted?
Right.
Where are you going to find peace of mind?
Right. And happiness, your own happiness. You should find happiness from within, not outsourcing your happiness that you have to, something else has to happen, or the intrinsic versus extrinsic source of motivation. I'm happy because I'm alive and I'm, working and I'm doing, I have my family and all of that. It's not, my happiness doesn't disappear because my candidate didn't win.
That's right. That's right. And I can't look outside myself for I'm responsible for my own well-being, regardless of the outcome. That's my responsibility. If you lived if you were a Trump hater, and I think it's pretty clear that the country was divided almost in half between Trump supporters and Trump haters. Okay. So even if you were a Trump hater for the past 4 years, you still had the responsibility of caring for yourself, of making sure that you were responsible for your own well-being. I don't like happiness, it wasn't happy, but at least content. You were content with your life, regardless of what was going on in Washington, D.C.
Right. Right.
How can I take good care of myself today? What do I have to do to feel good about my life today? You can't blame elected officials for your unhappiness. Your unhappiness is your responsibility.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And who the next question is, who else needs my love and care?
That's right.
Because it can't be all egocentric. It can't be all just about me. Right. We are social beings, and we are living in a society and in families where we have others that may need our love and care as well.
That's right. We talked earlier about having these arguments in front of other family members.
Right.
If you're a parent, you have to be very careful, because your children, regardless of their age, whether they're teenagers or toddlers, they need your love and your care. And if you're angry and fighting and upset about things, you're not going to be able to provide all of those nurturing to the people to the people in your life. Okay, whether it could be your parents, it could be your children, it could be relatives, it could be friends. They all need your love and care too. And if you're so angry and so upset that you're not able to provide that, then that you need to rethink that. So think about how the effect that this is all going to have on other people who depend on you for support.
Right. And
And
the
then,
last one is about staying present for yourself and for others. You know, you can't get lost in these idealized or fantasized worlds, again, on either direction.
exactly.
You have to stay present for yourself, present for those that need you and those who care about you. You know, keeping ourselves connected to that reality.
Right. And so his final message, the take home message here is that regardless of which candidate eventually is declared the winner, we have to maintain our own integrity. We have to focus on who we're going to be as an individual. We have to do this, first of all, for ourselves. I mean, who are you? And are you going to let an election or some other decision change, define, determine who you are? Or no, you have responsibility for yourself, you know, regardless of what's going on around you. And I think of Elie Wiesel and other concentration camp survivors. I mean, what could be worse than a Russian gulag? You know, Alexander Solzhenitsyn comes to mind. A Russian gulag, you have to, or a prison or a concentration camp, and yet these people very eloquently said, "I maintained my dignity regardless of my external circumstances. I maintained my dignity." We don't have anything like a concentration camp or a Russian gulag, so we can maintain ourselves. We also have to maintain it for our loved ones.
Right.
We other people depend on us, and we have to keep that in mind. That we have to keep ourselves together, so we keep providing for those who are in our care. And then finally, we have to take care of the country. We said earlier that our country has this, what seems like a quaint notion of the peaceful transition of power. That's not a quaint notion, and it hasn't gone out of style. One of the most important things we have managed to maintain across centuries is the peaceful transition of power. That shouldn't change with this election. And we all have the responsibility to make sure that it doesn't. And whoever occupies that office is the president of everybody, not just the president of the people who voted for him. I'm hoping that Biden doesn't become the president of just the people who voted for him. That would be a horrible mistake. Right? And I think of Nelson Mandela.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, so.
Yeah. And that sort of leads us right into the last, some interesting stuff from the last article that we want to pull.
Mm-hmm.
And this one's written by a physician who's talking about, you know, perhaps some of the frustration and anger and all that many experienced over the last 4 years, and how we need to recognize that there are aspects of that in all of us, and that, you know, we need to heal that. And so the title of it is "Recognize the Trump in All of Us and Try to Heal Him."
When I saw this article, I thought, I have got to read this, because I said, no, the title grabbed me immediately.
Mm-hmm.
I said, what in the world is this about? Now, fair warning here. This is a bit of an intellectual exercise. This guy obviously has read a lot of things that most people don't read. Don't let that throw you. There's a single message here. It's a simple and single message that he wants to give us. And I mentioned Solzhenitsyn earlier. And Solzhenitsyn was a Russian intellectual and a Russian dissident and a writer. And you can see he lived from 1918 to 1956. So he was born into Stalinist Russia, and grew up under a very repressive communist system, and ran into trouble with the authorities, and was sent to Siberia to a work camp, and spent, 8 or 10 years there. And for those of you who don't know, when you're sent to Siberia, there are no prison cells or barbed wire. You're out in the middle. You're 2,000 miles from anywhere. So if you want to leave, go ahead, because you're going to die in the vast expanse of Siberia. And so, speaking of having your dignity stripped away, that's what the gulag was about. Gulag is a chain of prison camps.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and then destroy them. Okay? But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And that's what this article is about, is that we all have good and evil. You know, I think of Alpha and Omega, or the different, and we have to remember that there's a very fine line separating good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
And so this based on that idea, this physician writes this article, and he had been in New York during the first surge of deaths, when he said the bodies were just mounting up, and he said they couldn't keep up with the death rate. And couldn't keep up with the death rate because they didn't know what they were dealing with it, or they knew, but they didn't have any way of dealing with it. We didn't have the supplies, we didn't have the infrastructure, we didn't have the protective gear that we needed. And he said he was so overwhelmed by this, the death rate and the illness rate, that he said he just felt numb. And he uses a phrase that I had never thought about, but he said, grief is just praise for what has been lost. And he couldn't reach that place of, the loss was so great that he just sort of got numb and disconnected, okay? And he said, now that we're facing a second wave of morbidity and mortality, of illness and death, he said he found himself contemplating his relationship with the president, with President Trump, because he was angry, and he admits that. He was angry with the policies that had not been in place, and the arguments that, while the physicians are trying to save lives, they see the elected officials kind of dithering and arguing over the various issues. And he said he had to come to terms with those feelings. And that's what this article is about. And he talks about the picture of Dorian Gray. For those of you who don't know the Dorian Gray, it's about a painting that when you look at it, the viewer changes as you look at the picture, and you see your ugly self. It was a beautiful painting, a beautiful face, and then as you look at it, it turns into this kind of monster. And it shows that the idea being that we have goodness in us and we have evil in us, and all of us have that. Okay. So he said, and that's what he finally decided. He said, how do I come to terms with these feelings? And it suddenly dawned on him that I have some of that in me. Mm-hmm. I have the capacity for evil in me. And that's what this article is about. So it's a little bit of a workout. He makes some references to Albert Camus and some other philosophers that many of us have not read, but the message remains clear. Okay, mm-hmm. And what he says is, I propose that we recognize that we attempt to recognize the Trump that lies within each of us and heal him. And this is that personal responsibility again. Okay, that we all have these characteristics. You know, you can laugh at him, you can blame him, you can hate him, but there is a Trump, or anybody else that you hate. There's a Hitler in all of us. There's a Stalin in all of us. There's a Jimmy Carter in all of us. We all have that other side. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so we have to recognize that exists within us. Okay.
Right, and it's important to know that, you know, because we live in a society, we all want to do well. You know, mm-hmm. Everybody wants to be successful. You know, right. We may define success differently. We may want to get there through a different means or on a different path. But that's what we all want. We want the country to be successful. We all want to be safe. We all want to, you know, have our needs met and all of that. So we all have that, but we want to do it differently. And to some, my path may seem to be a problem. They may seem like, oh, well, you know, you were only able to do that because of this, or you right. only do that because of that. You should have done it this way. You should have done it that way. My world is the reality that I've experienced, and through the life that I've lived. President Trump's is the life that is his reality. That is the life that he has lived. And so, you know, recognizing that, we all have that within us, things that we can connect to, that we agree with, things that we disagree with, things that we don't connect with.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can come to peace with that and be okay with this reality that there is this duality, there is this possibility that what we think is wholesome and good and good and well, positive, that somebody else will see it as negative.
Right. That's right. And we have both within ourselves.
Right.
Okay? And so what he says is we're not just battling the pandemic here. We are always battling the human condition. That part of me is very good and altruistic and decent and kind, but there's a part of me that's not those things. The Dorian Gray in me, that there is a beast inside all of us. It's we talk about the limbic system, and we're all capable. We are all capable of some pretty nasty thoughts and some pretty nasty deeds, and we have to recognize that. It's not just what's going on outside, but we also have to recognize that there's a human condition that all of us are struggling with.
Right.
And the pandemic and the election sort of brought this together for this physician. And he said, as a physician, it's clear, he reaches this conclusion, it's clear to me that we're all part of one global entity. Right. So we're all in this struggle together, the pandemic and the human condition. And he said, and this ties in with the other two articles that we talked about today. He said the concept of an other, and he put other in quotes, them, the them, okay, or they are doing this. He said that's a fiction that we must not allow ourselves to accept. And very clearly he's saying, we can't talk about they are doing anything, and we have to get over us versus them. We are all part of this thing, and we are all good and evil, right? And so this idea that somebody else is different is a fiction. And he said, if we're going to move forward, we have to accept that part of us has he calls it a rot. We're all part of the rot. We have our own inner beast, okay? And and we have to start by dealing with our own inner beast. And this is what he calls accepting Trump. Get your own personal Trump, even if you hate, because you hate him. Take that in and forgive and reintegrate. And again, I think of Nelson Mandela, where he had the act of reconciliation, in South Africa, with all the suffering that apartheid brought. And he said, we must forgive, we must forget, and we must have reconciliation. We're not going to punish those who punished us. And that's what this guy is, that's what this physician is seeking in this. And he said, the most revolutionary thing we can do right now is to come together and dissolve this this rot, this monster, with our love, with our care.
Right.
And he ends with a funny line.
Whether you hate Trump or you hate Biden, it's the same way. Now we're going to be facing 4 years with Biden as a president that many people may disagree with, may hate, but it's the same that goes with them, right? It's the same. That same perspective of you have to accept the reality that there is a part of that in all of us.
That's right. And we have to, and you're right, regardless of, I'm not sure that Biden produces the same emotional arousal that Trump did, but they are stealing the election. It's not, nobody's saying Biden stole the election. They're saying they stole the election. Okay, that they whoever that they is. We all have that inside. We can hate another, but we have that other inside us. We're not that different, is what he's saying, is that we all have that inside us. Okay, Trump was on display because he was president. But we all have a Trump, a Stalin, a Hitler, whoever you want to use, we all have that inside us, okay? And the only way to get rid of that is to realize that we have that and to integrate that beast, that rot, and say, okay, I understand that we're all this way, and I can stop hating you now because I'm the same way, and I'm the same human, I'm the same species, okay?
Right.
We all have that. And so he ends the article by saying, Trump, I love you. That would be hard to do.
Yeah.
That's going to be hard. Many people are going to have it very, very difficult to say, Trump, I love you. Biden, I love you. Okay,
Right.
regardless of which one it is. But what I do like is there is a place for you at the table, at my table. Okay.
Right.
And we have to, it's not just forgiving and forgetting, it's that we all have it. And whether it's Biden or Trump, I love you, Biden, I love you. There's a place for you at the table. We have to come together as a nation. The only way, the revolutionary thing, is we have to get back together as a nation. There's no us and them. We are all in the same condition.
Absolutely. So definitely, check out the show notes and follow the links to read these articles. There's a lot of great information, a lot of things just to think about, especially as, like we said at the beginning, moving into the holidays and preparing for, coming in contact with other people who may disagree with us. So, there's still much more of all of this to come. So be patient, be graceful, and, be kind, and we'll all move forward.
It's not. It's not. We're all. It's time. It's time to heal. It's time to bring people back together, regardless of who you like, who you dislike. Let's begin the healing process. On the one hand, the holidays are a dangerous time for people to get together because we do tend to argue. We talk about it every holiday season. We have the pandemic at work now. There are other problems we have to deal with. But it's also a time where we can let the healing begin. Let's drop some of these things. Let's realize that we're all in this together. There's work to be done, and that begins with everybody working together.
Absolutely.
Okay? Everybody has a responsibility.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, that is it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.